Let her finish. The room stilled. She wasn't on the team, wasn't even in uniform. Just a quiet figure in the rifle bay, cleaning what others tossed aside. But when the SEAL stepped forward, placed his weapon in her hands, and backed away, every operator turned to look. Not because of what she said, but because of who just gave her the floor. If respect is earned when no one's watching, type "she didn't need permission" below. The rifle bay was usually a place of noise. Tools, clinking, grips hitting trays, chatter about tight groups and jam bolts. She barely made a sound. The contrast was striking to anyone who paid attention. The armory typically buzzed with the controlled chaos of professional weapons maintenance, conversations about modifications, complaints about equipment failures, discussions of performance upgrades. But in her corner, silence. Assigned as a civilian contractor through a subcontractor's program, her badge only read Armory Support Technician. The designation was deliberately vague. Most support contracts were awarded to the lowest bidder, filled by personnel with minimal qualifications and maximum supervision requirements. No one called her by name. She wasn't in the rotation. The oversight wasn't malicious, just institutional. Support staff weren't part of operational teams. They performed necessary functions without requiring personal relationships or tactical integration. Most assumed she was an intern, or worse, someone given a pity contract. The assumption was understandable. Defense contractors occasionally hired personnel who couldn't meet standard requirements, but had connections that made employment politically expedient. She never corrected them. Correction would have required explanation, and explanation would have required revealing background that was better left undiscussed. Day after day, she cleaned receivers no one wanted to touch. The weapons that ended up at her station were the problematic ones. Equipment that had been returned multiple times. Rifles with intermittent failures that frustrated experienced armorers. Systems that worked inconsistently despite meeting technical specifications. Matched bolt carriers by instinct. Reassembled optics faster than most operators could. Her work pace was remarkable for someone supposedly learning the trade. Components that took experienced technicians 30 minutes to properly align were correctly positioned in her hands within moments. She didn't speak unless spoken to, never asked for range time. Range access was restricted to qualified personnel. Support contractors weren't typically authorized for live-fire exercises, especially those without formal military training documentation. She just kept wiping down weapons, fixing what was broken, and returning them better than new. But the improvements weren't random. Trigger mechanisms that had been adequate became smooth and responsive. Optics that had been functional became precisely calibrated. Reliability that had been acceptable became absolute. The quality of her work was beginning to be noticed by operators who'd assumed civilian contractors were capable of basic cleaning, but little else. Weapons returned from her workstation performed better than they had when originally issued. Modifications that enhanced performance without compromising safety. Adjustments that seem minor, but significantly improved operational effectiveness. Then came the SEALs. The arrival of naval special warfare personnel changed the dynamic of any facility. Their requirements were more demanding, their equipment more sophisticated, their tolerance for error non-existent. They brought weapons that had been customized for specific operational environments, equipment that required understanding of both technical specifications and practical application in combat conditions, the kind of maintenance that separated competent technicians from true armorers. She watched them with the same quiet attention she gave to every aspect of her work, not studying them personally, but observing their equipment needs and the standards they would expect. Because some contracts were about basic maintenance. Others were about ensuring that when operators deployed into hostile environments, their equipment would function flawlessly under conditions that tested both human and mechanical limits. The SEALs represented the latter category, and she understood the difference better than anyone realized. You don't ask for a moment like this. You earn it one silent decision at a time. If that rings true, type "let her work" below. The SEAL team was cycling through for a desert op. New climate, new terrain. Every weapon had to be rebalanced. Desert operations presented unique challenges for weapons maintenance: sand infiltration that could cause catastrophic failures, temperature extremes that affected metallurgy and precision, humidity changes that influenced optical alignment. Every component required verification, every adjustment needed confirmation under conditions that simulated operational environment. They dropped off their gear like always, casual, confident. The confidence was earned through years of successful operations, but it was also based on expectations that their equipment would be maintained by personnel who understood the stakes involved. She took it without question. No conversation about requirements, no requests for clarification, just acceptance of responsibility for ensuring that sophisticated weapon systems would perform flawlessly when lives depended on them. One rifle, a custom-modified Mk18 with an unmarked receiver, had a carbon jam so deep even the lead armorer refused to dig into it. The weapon represented thousands of dollars in modifications and countless hours of customization, but carbon buildup had created a malfunction that seemed to require complete disassembly and potential replacement of critical components. The lead armorer's reluctance was understandable. Aggressive cleaning could damage precision components. Conservative approaches might fail to resolve the underlying problem. She said nothing, just slid it toward her tray. While others worked, laughed, reassembled, one SEAL noticed she hadn't looked up once. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rivera had developed instincts about people who worked with weapons. 20 years of operations had taught him to recognize competence that didn't advertise itself. He walked over, quiet, watching. His observation was systematic, professional. The way she held tools, the sequence of her disassembly, the precision of her movements. A minute passed, then two. The work was delicate, requiring micro-adjustments that could easily cause more damage than they resolved. But her movement suggested confidence based on experience, not hesitation based on uncertainty. She didn't flinch, just reverse the carbon scarring manually with a curve pick no one else used. The tool was unusual, not standard issue, but purpose-built for specific applications. The technique was advanced, requiring understanding of metallurgy and pressure dynamics that exceeded basic technical training. "You've done this before," he finally said. She glanced up. "A few times." The response was characteristic, minimal, honest, without elaboration. But Rivera heard something in her tone that suggested "a few times" was significant understatement. That's when he turned unslung his own rifle. The weapon was his personal responsibility, modified specifically for his operational requirements, maintained exclusively by personnel he trusted completely. The one no one touched but him. Walked back to her bench, placed it down, and said loud enough for the room to hear, "Let her finish." The statement was unprecedented. SEALs didn't surrender personal weapons to unproven personnel. The trust being demonstrated transcended normal contractor relationships. He stepped back. Silence. The armory had gone quiet in recognition that something significant was happening. Conversation stopped, work paused. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. A few laughed nervously. One muttered, "He's serious?" The nervous laughter reflected discomfort with a situation that challenged normal assumptions about competence and authority. But the SEAL didn't move, so neither did anyone else. His commitment to the decision was absolute. Whatever he had observed had convinced him to demonstrate trust that would either validate his judgment or publicly embarrass him. She picked up the rifle, smooth, deliberate, ran her hands across the frame, found the microfracture near the gas block by sound alone. The diagnostic was remarkable, identifying structural problems through tactile and auditory techniques that exceeded the capabilities of most electronic testing equipment. 10 minutes later, it was pristine. She didn't hand it back. She set it on his side of the bench and walked away. And that was the moment the entire base shifted. That evening, the team's armorer pulled her file. Something didn't line up. Staff Sergeant Jake Thompson had 23 years of experience with military personnel records. He could usually determine someone's background and qualifications within minutes of reviewing their documentation. But her file raised more questions than it answered. No boot camp, no standard certifications. The absence of normal military training documentation was unusual for someone with access to classified equipment. Most contractor positions required either military experience or extensive civilian credentials. But someone had cleared her for classified storage access 3 levels above base protocol. The security clearance was remarkable level classifications that typically required years of background investigation and operational necessity. The kind of authorization reserved for personnel whose work directly affected national security. Deeper in the record, they found a line that just said, "Former SOTB Field Armorer retired, not discharged. SOTB, Special Operations Team Black." Thompson stopped reading. He understood military acronyms, but this designation was outside his experience. Very few ever saw those letters. Even fewer understood what they meant. Black operations existed in the spaces between official military activities. Personnel assigning to projects that didn't appear in standard organizational charts. Missions that required capabilities not available through conventional channels. She'd been embedded with combat engineers, foreign assets, and Black Ops units for 6 years. The duration was significant. Black operations typically involved short-term assignments with extensive debriefing periods. 6 years suggested continuous deployment in environments that required specialized skills and absolute reliability. Then vanished off-grid. The transition from active service to civilian contractor status had gaps that couldn't be explained through normal career progression. Personnel didn't simply leave Black operations for support positions without extensive documentation. Rumors said she left after a field failure in Kandahar that left 2 squads compromised. Thompson had heard stories about operations that went wrong, equipment failures that caused casualties, situations where technical problems had tactical consequences that couldn't be resolved through standard procedures. She never spoke of it. Military personnel rarely discuss classified operations, especially those that involve casualties or compromised missions. But her silence seemed more complete than normal operational security. But her hands still remembered every angle, every pressure point, every fracture curve, and a rifle under duress. The muscle memory was evident in her work. Techniques that could only be learned through experience under conditions where mistakes had fatal consequences. And now, without fanfare, she was rebuilding trust the same way she rebuilt weapons, 1 pin at a time. The approach was methodical, patient. Trust earned through consistent performance rather than promised through credentials or reputation. The SEAL who handed her his weapon that day, Petty Officer Rivera, represented the kind of operator who'd worked with the best armorers in military service. His standards were based on experience with personnel whose competence had been proven under combat conditions. His father had once served with the field armorer in Libya. The connection was generational. Stories passed from one generation of operators to another. Recognition of skills that couldn't be replicated through formal training. He'd recognized the same focus in her movements. "You don't learn that in tech school," he later said. "You learn it when your whole team's counting on you, and the rifle in your lap is the only reason they'll make it out."
The explanation revealed understanding that went beyond technical competence. Field armoring required not just mechanical skills, but comprehension of tactical realities, where equipment failure meant operational failure, where precision wasn't about meeting specifications, but about ensuring that when operators needed their weapons to function, they functioned, where responsibility wasn't about completing assigned tasks, but about enabling mission success under conditions that tested every component and every decision. She learned those lessons in places where failure meant more than poor performance evaluations. And now, she was applying those lessons in an environment where they could make a difference again. A week later, the rifle bay was quiet again, but not cold. The atmosphere had changed, subtly, but permanently. The same work continued, but with new awareness of competence that had been present, but unrecognized. Operators came and went, most nodded at her now. The acknowledgement was simple, but significant. Recognition that transcended formal hierarchy or credential verification. Respect based on demonstrated ability rather than assumed qualification. Some asked questions, others waited until she had time. The questions were different from routine contractor interactions. Technical discussions that assumed expertise rather than requiring basic explanation. Consultations that sought professional insight rather than simple service confirmation. She still didn't wear a uniform, still no title on the door. Her status remained officially unchanged. Support contractor without formal military designation, civilian personnel without command authority or operational responsibility. But in the corner of the armory, a new rack was installed. Custom built, reinforced wood, laser engraved. The construction was professional quality, built to military specifications, but with attention to detail that exceeded standard equipment. Someone had invested time and resources in creating something permanent and meaningful. It held only one weapon, the SEAL's rifle. Petty Officer Rivera's personal weapon occupied the position of honor. The rifle that had represented his decision to demonstrate trust in unproven competence. Fully restored, personalized mods replaced. The weapon was better than it had been when originally customized. Improvements that enhance performance without altering the characteristics Rivera had specifically requested. No plaque, no signature. The absence of attribution was deliberate, recognition that focused on results rather than personal promotion. Just a small brass plate on the wood that read, "Let her finish." The phrase captured the moment when competence had overcome assumption, when quiet expertise had been allowed to demonstrate itself without interference or premature judgment. She didn't ask for it. She didn't take a photo. The memorial wasn't for her benefit. It was for the benefit of future personnel who might encounter similar situations. A reminder that competence didn't always announce itself through conventional channels. She simply kept working, wiping down a battered sidearm someone had given up on. The routine continued. Weapons that other armorers had declared unrepairable. Equipment that operators had written off as expendable, because respect doesn't arrive all at once. It's built from the moments where no one was supposed to be watching, but someone did. The observation that led to recognition. The attention that revealed capabilities that might have otherwise remained hidden. Her work continued with the same quiet precision that had characterized it from the beginning. But now, it was observed with appreciation rather than dismissal. Operators brought their most challenging problems to her station, not because she advertised advanced capabilities, but because results spoke louder than any credential could. The rifle bay had become a place where competence was recognized regardless of formal qualifications, where trust was earned through demonstration rather than proclaimed through documentation, where someone who served in the shadows continued to serve without seeking spotlight because some contributions were measured in lives saved rather than recognition received. Some expertise was proven through reliability rather than celebrated through ceremony. And some respect was earned by those who never asked for it, but deserved it completely. If you believe skill is quiet and recognition doesn't require noise, type "they step back for a reason" below. Subscribe to Iron Heart Stories, where the loudest salute is silence and trust is earned without asking.